I dropped the carton of milk the second I saw him. It burst across the grocery store floor in a white wave around my shoes, but I barely heard the cashier gasp, barely noticed people turning. Because 10 feet away, standing under the harsh freezer, lights with one hand on a shopping cart, was my husband, not my dead husband. For a second, my mind refused to make sense of what my eyes were seeing. The same broad shoulders, the same crooked nose he'd broken playing college baseball, the same wedding band tan line, pale against his hand as he reached for a bag of frozen shrimp like this was any ordinary Tuesday. I couldn't breathe. My chest locked so hard it felt like my ribs had been wired shut. I had buried that man. I had stood beside a casket and listened to strangers tell me he'd been a good husband. I had signed the insurance paperwork with shaking hands. I had cried until my throat bled and learned how to sleep on one side of the bed without touching the cold, empty hat he left behind. And now he was here, alive, calm, buying groceries. Then he turned. Our eyes met across the aisle, and in that one terrible second, I watched a dead man recognize his widow. He didn't look shocked. He looked caught. The cart beside him wasn't empty. There were oranges in the child's seat, a loaf of expensive bread, a bouquet of sunflowers, and a woman standing next to him with her hand curled around his wrist like she belonged there. She looked up at him when the milk hit the floor, smiling at first, then frowning when she followed his stare and saw me. I don't remember deciding to move. One second I was frozen. The next, I was stumbling backward into a display of canned soup. My knees weak, my fingers numb, my whole body shaking so hard I thought I might collapse right there between frozen dinners and discount peas. He was alive. I was identifying a body, while I was choosing a coffin, while I was sitting alone at our kitchen table, trying to figure out how to pay the mortgage with half the income and twice the debt. A sound came out of me, then half laugh, half sob, something broken and animal. People stared. The cashier asked if I was okay. Okay. I had spent 11 months grieving a man who had apparently just changed zip codes and upgraded his life. He took one step toward me, and that was almost worse than seeing him at all. Like he still had the right, like he could smooth this over with the same calm voice he used when he lied about overtime, lied about money, lied about where he was sleeping. My vision blurred with tears so hot they felt poisonous. I wasn't heartbroken anymore. I was humiliated. And underneath that humiliation, rising fast and deadly, was rage. Before he became a ghost, Daniel was the kind of man people trusted instantly. He had that easy, practiced warmth that made waitresses lean in and old men slap him on the back like they'd known him for years. When we met, he made me feel like the only steady thing in a loud, spinning room. He remembered little details: how I hated raw onions, how I took my coffee too strong, how I still slept with one foot outside the blanket because my mother used to say it cooled bad dreams. He noticed me, and when you've spent enough of your life being overlooked, noticed can feel dangerously close to loved. Our first years together looked beautiful from the outside. Sunday farmers markets, paint samples spread across the kitchen table. Late-night Chinese takeout eaten straight from the cartons while we argued over which wall should hold the wedding photos. He danced with me in socks on the hardwood floor while pasta boiled over on the stove. He kissed my forehead when I was sick. He called me his home. Even now, I hate admitting that some of it felt real. He wasn't perfect. He could be evasive. When I asked about money, he had a way of turning serious conversations into jokes until I felt petty or pressing. Sometimes he disappeared emotionally for days, hiding behind work stress, headaches, silence. But every marriage has rough edges, and Daniel knew exactly how to make each one look harmless. He'd bring flowers after a cold week, touch the small of my back in public, apologize with that soft, steady voice that made me question my own instincts. He never lied so boldly that the lie could be held in your hand. He lied like Mistine Shifty, easy to walk through until you realized you were completely soaked. That was his real talent. Not disappearing, convincing me over and over that there was nothing to see until the day there was nothing left at all. The phone call came on a Thursday at 6:14 in the morning. A state trooper asked if I was the wife of Daniel Mercer. And before he said anything else, I already knew my life had split in two. They told me there had been an accident on a rural highway 3 counties over. His car had gone through a guardrail and into a ravine. There had been a fire. They used careful words, official words. words designed to sound respectful when the truth was too ugly to hand over whole. By noon, I was sitting under fluorescent lights at a county office, signing forms I couldn't read because my tears kept blurring the lines. By evening, our house was full of casseroles, folded hands, lowered voices, and people saying, "I can't imagine," before going home to lives that still made sense. The funeral was closed-casket. Everyone told me that was mercy. I stood beside polished wood and white lilies so fragrant they made me nauseous, greeting people who praised my husband's kindness, his work ethic, his laugh. I wore black heels that cut my feet raw and smiled until my face trembled. His mother cried into my shoulder. His brother talked about Daniel in the past tense like it was natural, effortless, easy. I remember thinking grief should feel sacred. Instead, it felt public, performative, like I was trapped in a play I never auditioned for. Then came the practical devastation, dissurance, delayed payment over technical questions. The mortgage didn't pause for mourning. Credit card bills surfaced that I'd never seen before. A personal loan arrived in the mail with his signature on it and a balance big enough to make my stomach drop. There were medical fees, towing fees, legal fees, death certificate copies that somehow cost money each time my pain needed proving. People pitied me, which is its own kind of loneliness. At first they called, then less, then not at all. At night, the house groaned around me. His shoes still sat by the back door. His toothbrush leaned in the cup beside mine. I slept in fragments, waking with my hands stretched across cold sheets, reaching for a man I thought the earth had already taken. For 10 months, I've forced myself not to ask questions that had nowhere to go. Grief is exhausting enough without adding suspicion to it, and every time something felt off, I blamed trauma, memory problems, stress, the simple cruelty of surviving. But the first real crack came in the mail, tucked between a grocery flyer and a final notice from the electric company. It was a bank statement, not unusual, except the account number didn't match any of the ones I knew, and the envelope had been forwarded from a P.O. box Daniel had supposedly closed 2 years earlier. I almost tossed it aside. Then I saw the date. The account had activity 3 weeks after his death. At first, I told myself it had to be an automatic withdrawal, some delayed processing error, some bureaucratic ghosts. But when I opened it, my hands started shaking. There were cash withdrawals, a hotel charge in another state, a purchase at a marina store, and at the bottom, in neat black print, a signature authorization request that had been approved after the accident. I knew his signature the way some women know hymns. Daniel had a strange little hook on the D, like he was pulling the rest of his name behind it. It was there, clear as daylight, alive on the page. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at that paper until the room went dim around the edges. My coffee went cold. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice and stopped. Ordinary sounds, ordinary afternoon. Except suddenly nothing was ordinary anymore by that night. Grief had shifted shape. It was still heavy, but now it had sharp edges. I told no one. Not because I was calm, and not because I was uncertain, but because some instinct I should have trusted years earlier finally woke up and grabbed me by the throat. If Daniel had lied well enough to fake a death, then he had lied well enough to vanish again the second he sensed danger. So I smiled when neighbors asked how I was holding up. I thanked people for their concern. I paid bills, answered emails, folded laundry, and at night I turned into someone else entirely. I became meticulous. I requested records I had never thought to look for while he was alive: bank statements, tax transcripts, credit reports, insurance correspondence, copies of his employment files. I learned how much can be hidden in plain sight if one person controls the passwords and the other person is too busy loving them to notice. The second account led to a third. The third led to a prepaid phone bill. That led to online storage fees, linked to an email address I'd never seen before, one that used his middle name and birth year. Inside were booking confirmations, scanned IDs, marina receipts, and photos, dozens of them, time-stamped after the day. I stood in black and accepted condolences over an empty casket. In one picture, Daniel was on a dock in mirrored sunglasses, smiling into the sun like a man reborn. In another, he stood beside the same woman I'd later see in the grocery store, her hand on his chest, both of them tanned and careless and alive. The money explained the method. The woman explained the motive. But the deeper I dug, the uglier it got. He hadn't just run away. He had taken out loans in both our names, shifted balances, drained savings in increments small enough not to trigger panic, and positioned me to absorb the collapse once he was declared gone. His death hadn't been an escape hatch. It had been a strategy. By the end of that week, I understood something that made my skin go cold. Daniel hadn't merely abandoned me. He had staged my ruin. Wish I could say the worst part was discovering my husband was alive. It wasn't. The worst part was realizing how many people had helped bury me, while he was busy pretending to be dead. The first clue came from a funeral invoice I'd seen before, but never really examined. At the time, I was too shattered to notice the inconsistencies: unusual rush fees, a private transfer authorization, paperwork signed by someone other than me before I had even arrived. I called the funeral home pretending I was organizing my records for taxes, and the woman on the phone casually mentioned that Daniel's brother, Scott, had handled so much of the logistics. Scott thought, the same Scott who held my elbow at the service when my legs gave out. The same Scott who looked me in the eye and said, "He loved you. You know that." My stomach dropped so hard I had to sit down. Once I started looking at his involvement, I saw him everywhere. A witness signature on a storage unit release, a temporary mailing address linked to one of the hidden accounts, a cash deposit made the day after the supposed accident in a town 20 minutes from where Scott lived. And then there was the lawyer, Daniel's old college friend, who had pushed me to settle estate issues quickly, always with a little too much urgency and a little too much sympathy. Daniel hadn't disappeared alone. His brother had helped build the lie, his friend had helped protect it, and the woman at the grocery store hadn't stolen a married man. She had inherited one already. Rotunda that night, I spread every document across my dining room table and stared at the wreckage of my marriage until sunrise painted the windows gray dot. Part of me wanted to drive back to that grocery store and scream in his face until the whole building stopped breathing. I wanted him cornered, exposed, forced to look at what he had done to me. But rage is loud, and loud gives men like Daniel time to escape. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done. Nothing, at least, nothing he could see. I stopped searching his name from home. I backed up every file twice. I sent copies of the financial records, account activity, photos, and signatures to a new email he didn't know existed. Then I booked consultations quietly with a fraud investigator, a probate attorney, and an insurance claims specialist. For the first time in nearly a year, I wasn't reacting. I was arranging. That was the moment the power shifted. Not when I found him alive. Not when I proved he lied. When I understood that shock was exactly what he had counted on, and refused to give it to him. If Daniel wanted to rise from the dead, then I would make sure he did it in public. The hearing was scheduled for a Monday morning in a county building so cold it made my fingers ache. Officially, it was about the disputed insurance payout and irregularities tied to Daniel's reported death. Unofficially, it was the room where his second life stopped being a private fantasy and became evidence. I arrived early in a navy suit I'd bought with money from selling my grandmother's jewelry after he died. The irony tasted bitter and clean. My attorney sat beside me, calm and sharp. Across the room, the insurance investigator flipped through a binder thick enough to break a nose. Scott came in first, pale and sweating through his collar. The lawyer friend followed, avoiding my eyes. Then Daniel walked in, alive, groomed, wearing a gray suit, and the expression of a man still arrogant enough to believe the explanation could save him. The room changed when people recognized him. You could feel it happen. Air sucked out, chairs creaked. Someone near the back whispered, "That's him." He saw me and stopped for half a beat. I held his gaze. No shaking, no tears. I had spent those already when the questions began. He tried the soft approach first. Confusion, misunderstanding. He claimed he'd been under extreme mental distress after the accident, disoriented, manipulated, ashamed to return. Once things spiraled, it might have worked on strangers if not for the paper trail spread neatly in front of us. My attorney started with the bank records, withdrawals after the date of death, transfers to hidden accounts, loans taken in both our names. Then, the investigator introduced the hotel receipt, marina purchases, prepaid phone account, and digital storage records. One by one, each item stripped away another layer of his story. I watched Daniel's face tighten at the jaw, then the eyes, then the mouth. Watched him realize this was not a grieving widow lashing out. This was architecture. I had built the collapse carefully. Then came the photographs. The first one showed him on the dock, shirt open, smiling into sunlight while I was home, comparing casket prices. The second showed him with the woman from the grocery store, time-stamped 6 weeks after the funeral. The third showed Scott in the corner of a restaurant's selfie, half hidden but unmistakable. Scott folded in on himself. His lawyer friend asked for a recess. Denied. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, because I wanted every person in that room to feel how deliberate I had become. I buried my husband, I said, and even now those words made the room go still. I signed documents, paid debts, lost my home's equity, sold family heirlooms, and spent 11 months believing I had survived the worst day of my life. But the worst day of my life wasn't the day he died. I looked directly at Daniel. It was the day I learned he never did. He tried to interrupt then, some desperate sentence about panic, mistakes, fear. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You watched me grieve you, I said. You let your family comfort me with lies. You let me drown in debt you created. You stood beside another woman while I was still defending your memory. The investigator asked him whether he denied authorizing the post-death withdrawals. Silence. Whether he denied the hidden accounts. Silence. Whether Scott had assisted in transferring funds and coordinating false logistics. Scott started crying. That was the moment it broke. Not with shouting, but with silence heavy enough to crush every excuse in the room. Daniel's mask didn't crack dramatically. It just slid off, revealing something smaller and meaner underneath. Not a mastermind, not a tragic man, just a coward who thought my love would do the hard part of disappearing for him. By the time the hearing ended, referrals had been made, claims frozen, statements recorded, and every person he had manipulated was staring at him like a stranger pulled from a grave. He had wanted a clean death. What he got was resurrection under oath. The consequences came faster than I expected and slower than I wanted. Insurance formally denied every claim connected to Daniel's fake death and opened a fraud case. The probate court reversed key estate actions, freezing what remained of his hidden assets and flagging the transfers that had buried me in debt. My attorney helped untangle the loans he'd taken in both our names, and, for the first time in months, official paperwork arrived that didn't ask more from it, gave something back. Scott took a deal to avoid harsher charges and lost nearly everything in the process. His wife left within weeks. The lawyer friend was reported to the bar and suspended pending investigation. As for the woman from the grocery store, she disappeared the moment the story became public. I never blamed her the way I blamed him. Some people chase damaged men because they mistake secrecy for depth. Daniel lost the thing he valued most: control. His employer cut ties. Friends who had praised him at the funeral stopped returning his calls. Neighbors who once brought me casseroles now crossed the street to avoid him. Shame finally found the right address. I didn't get back every dollar. Justice is rarely that neat. But I kept the house. I recovered enough to breathe again. I opened a new bank account in my name only, changed every password, and took his shoes from beside the back door and dropped them in a donation bin with Asaromi. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. What Daniel D taught me something brutal. Betrayal doesn't always arrive screaming. Sometimes it comes dressed as love, asking you to doubt your own instincts until losing yourself feels normal. I'm not proud of how long I ignored the cracks, but I'm proud of what I did when I finally saw them. If you've ever been lied to, discarded, humiliated, or made to feel foolish for trusting someone you love, please hear me. Their deception is not proof that you are weak. Surviving it is proof that you're stronger than they counted on. I mourned a man who never deserved it, but I also found the woman he almost destroyed. If you've lived through something like this, tell me. I know I'm not the only one.